Good everyone, on this video today we have the start of a new series called You Talisman. If you're new to the channel, you would not have seen this series be announced in a channel news video, but that's fine because I'm going to cover what this series will cover anyway. So, for those of that have been, shall we say, long-term Joseph 2000 viewers, you will know that I've had a Talisman series running for a very long time now, pretty much since I started the channel, give or take. And what this series would normally entail is me taking out vehicles that I have talismans on, and of course just taking them out and seeing how they're doing, and that's pretty much all it was. And this is where this series stems from. Obviously there is going to come a time, a very sad time, when the Talisman series eventually dies, which I'm sure a lot of you are not looking forward to that. And this is why we're going to be doing a bit more of an in-depth sort of thing. And this is going to cover the vehicles that we obviously cover in that series in a bit more depth, and basically me recommending you if you should talisman these vehicles or not. And of course we are starting off with the P shooters because we're doing them in nation order, and every aircraft and tank that has been featured in the Talisman series up to this point, and of course in the future, will be featured. That includes vehicles that freshly get an episode in like 2 years from now or something. But anyway, the P-26 A-34 M2 is where we're going to begin because this was the first aircraft to get an episode in that series. So, in the description below there's a few timestamps where we will be covering each individual part of what this P-shooter brings to the table, comparing it to its competition, its firepower and of course handling, and overall its performance and what it really does compared to the competition. In the description below you'll find a link to the weaponry part, the performance part / handling, and of course the competition where we'll be looking at the USA tech tree and comparing the vehicles accordingly. Okay, so let's begin with the weaponry. The weaponry on the P-26 A-34 M2 is probably one of the more superior ones at its reserve rank. Now, once the 50 cal runs out, that is entirely wrong, because trust me, 0.16 kilograms of burst mass per second is not exactly great when you're only running a 30 cal once your 50 cal runs out, but, you know, you got to think positively in some way. At least you've got a gun. And this is where the P-26 has a bit of a power advantage over the two other P-shooters in the tech tree. As we all know, the reserve tech tree for USA is the A-34 M2, the A-33, which will not get its own episode because obviously I don't have a talisman on it, and of course the B-35. To talisman one of these P shooters, it is 190 golden eagles. This is the same for all reserves. And of course on sale that will go down to a measly 85. Now what you've got to remember as well is that there are premiums available in the tech tree. This is available, this is available, this is available. You have to buy a pack for this, and you have to buy this on the marketplace. So please do ignore these two. But anyway, let's get into the P-26 and really cover what its firepower is about. So as we said, the 50 cal is on the right hand side of the aircraft and is the main selling point of this P shooter compared to its competition. With it having a 50 cal at battle rating 1.0, not only can you bring this thing into a reserve tank match, which, trust me, this thing is quite good in ground OB, and you can also take out big bombers, which you normally couldn't take out with a regular P shooter, or at least you'd have to throw enough crap at the wall and hope it sticks. It can definitely take out stuff like HE-111s, B-18s if you get a mixed match. It can also take out some of the bigger Russian ones like the SB-2Ms. It can definitely give those a run for its money with its firepower. And of course, on the left-hand side of the engine cowling, we have the 7.62 Browning, which, this isn't amazing, I'll be honest, but the fact that you've actually got a 50 cal to back this up is actually pretty good. And whilst it does have its moments where even this armament is a bit 50-50, no pun intended, this armament is featured on quite a few low-tier fighters for the USA. And overall, it's not too bad in terms of its firepower. But of course, there is one other thing we need to cover, and that is the bomb load. This aircraft can carry two 100-pound bombs, which have a 24.5 kilogram burst, well, TNT equivalent, I should say, and they can penetrate up to 65 millimeters of armor. That's of course maximum. The radius for destruction of armoured vehicles is 7 feet, so you pretty much have to put these through the letterbox, in a way, on their tank. But if you do get a bomb on target, this will generally kill it. And if you want to see how the rack looks, it's underneath the aircraft and is pretty easy to aim. Once you get used to it, you can get some kills with this, and of course the 50 cal will be helping out in ground RB. And if we look at the actual penetration, you'll see why. 13mm of penetration at 10 meters. Obviously, you're never going to get 10 meters unless, I don't know, you land a pea shooter and, I don't know, you're shooting up a hill and there's someone literally sat 10 meters in front of you. I don't think that's ever going to happen. So, give or take, you're going to have around 20mm, I should say, of penetration. And at absolute most, and I mean absolute most, you'll probably have around 22. This is pretty good for taking out most tanks, even from the side at low tier, because of just how little armor vehicles have around that BR. And even then, when you're coming in from above, you are top downing every single vehicle at this BR with just this gun alone, which is incredible, to say the least. But then we come to the stinker, which is the 30 cal. I recommend running stealth on this, whereas you run ground on 12.7. This is a bit shit, I'll be honest, and even with stealth, this gun does have its moments where it's actually pretty okay, but obviously once your 50 cal runs out, you're really going to feel it, and trust me, I've had that happen before, because I was once in a ground RB match where I'd used all my 50 cal and only had the 30 cal to shoot down a Stuka. It took a while, is all I'll say, and I lost my engine because of it, but, you know. The only other belt you could probably run on this is Universal. The Tracer's belt you should avoid like the plague. It is terrible. But the 7.62 isn't like the worst in terms of its damage output, but it can have its moments. And running stealth can definitely help with that. And also running stealth means you're hitting with the 50 cal always, and if you're hitting with a 50, you're hitting with a 30. So it's pretty good in that regard. Overall, its armament for its BR is actually not that bad, but of course, as we'll come into the actual competition part, once we compare it to other vehicles, you'll realise it's not as special as you might think, and that can obviously be quite disappointing in some aspects. So now we're going to go to a test flight, and we're going to take a look at the performance and the handling. And welcome to the test flight. This will just briefly cover how the aircraft handles, what the guns do against ground targets, such as those vehicles over there, and of course we'll be seeing how it handles with the bombs on, and of course just overall covering its overall acceleration and everything. So, let's get a move on. Taking off is not too bad. Landing, however, that's a whole different story, but we will cover that later. It gets off the ground pretty well, but of course biplanes at its BR will be able to get above it in terms of takeoff speed and all that jazz. Now what you got to remember is the bomb rack does have a slight drag modifier, so if you are dropping the bombs, even after, you are going to be slower than a normal pea shooter, but not by a lot. So now we're going to do what I was on about with the ground attack. So I'm going to get a bit of a better angle on this Chi-He. You won't run into Chi-He's, but watch this. We actually took out the loader on that tank with just the 50 cal. The 30 cal did nothing. But you can see what I mean, like the 50 cal definitely does help it out a little bit. Of course, against the frontal armor of a Chi-He, it's not going to matter. But that's why we have the bombs. And there goes that Chi-He. As I said, the bombs do drop separate, well, they do drop as a pair. And just overall, it's definitely able to get its bombs on target. Now what we're going to do is demonstrate the low level speed, because you're going to be at low altitude anyway, unless you're climbing a little bit. And for its BR, it's pretty respectable, as you can see. Does around 220 at most out at this low altitude, which is not bad. It can of course outrun some biplanes. Can even outrun a couple of monoplanes. It depends on what you're really fighting. But realistically, you're not going to be outrunning the more modern monoplanes. But even with a bomb load on, this thing does turn pretty okay. but there's obviously a few caveats. I'm going to drop the bombs for this. I know they're probably going to reload before we land, but this P-26 does come with landing flaps, which I will deploy them now so you can have a look. They do take a while, so just take that into consideration. These were mainly meant to help the P-26 on landing, because this thing does have a bit of a problem with that, which we're going to demonstrate now. So I'm going to slow the plane for landing with the landing flaps. And this is really where it can be a bit daunting to put a talisman on to a newer player. Yeah, I had a feeling to do that. Let's get rid of them. So I'm going to put a bit of power on, just to get us over the hill. And this is where the P-26 will fall a little short. Now I'm going to do what I do for landing P-shooters, because they can be a bit of a bugger, to say the least. So now that we've landed, you'll notice, well, this is more of the test flight runway. This isn't the P-shooter doing that. You'll notice I wasn't even touching the brakes there, and it flipped over on landing. Even with the landing flaps, this thing can flip over, and it will sometimes kill your pilot. That ain't ideal, is it? Sometimes you'll survive it, like we did there. Other times, you won't. So now that we've covered that, let's go back to the hangar and discuss this thing's competition. And welcome back to the hangar. This will briefly cover the competition that this aircraft faces in terms of putting talismans on, and personally what I would suggest over this vehicle, because unfortunately I can't suggest putting a talisman on this vehicle. Now of course, some people are going to say, why would you bother putting a rank 1 talisman anyway? Some people do, and to be honest, it can sometimes help a little bit if you're really strapped for cash and you just want to get through the trees quickly. And with a bigger tree like USA, it's not a bad shout, but with some other nations, yeah, don't bother. But anyway, that's a whole different topic for another day. So in terms of its competition, it does have some quite strong contenders, such as the P-36A, the P-36C, the F-3F2, and that's just the fighters. At least what I would put talismans on. The main reason why I'm not suggesting the P-36G, the F-2A3 and the F-2A1 is because generally speaking, there's better aircraft at rank 2 that can do what these guys can do, but better, and they also grind more efficiently. So even though I have talismans on these three from over the years, yeah, ignore these. These are the main, or these two are the main ones that I would say. And of course the P-36C, which it is 1-7, but it can still get rank 1 matchmaking, so that's at least something. Now of course, comparing to the P-36A, the P-shooter loses out on quite a bit. The only real thing that the P-36A loses out on, other than its roll rate, is the bomb load, because the P-36s do not carry bombs. But as I demonstrated with that 50 cal in the overview of the handling and everything, this is where the P-36 really beats it, because the P-36 is more agile, it climbs roughly the same, it has a better top speed, and most importantly, it has the same guns, so you can do even more top-down stuff than you could in a P-shooter. But of course the P-shooter, as we demonstrated, if you skip that section of course, that's perfectly fine, this obviously doesn't carry any bombs. So that's where this aircraft does start to fall short a tiny bit, but otherwise it's all positive, because the P-36A is faster, it's more maneuverable. Whilst it does lose out a little bit on roll rate, it is just a much better aircraft overall in terms of its capability. Then of course the P-36C, it is one of those vehicles that just adds on more. I mean, it does lose a little bit of performance compared to the A, but it does of course gain something for that. It gains two 30 caliber machine guns, which of course we will be covering the P-36C in this series anyway. But regardless, the fact that this thing brings even more firepower to the table and only goes up to 1.7 because of it, it does start to really show why you never should talisman one of the P-26s in this tech tree. Then of course we come to the one that you should absolutely put a talisman on if you really want to, the F-3F2. Now whilst there is a premium available for this aircraft, this is a little bit cheaper. And personally, you can definitely see why I would say put the Talisman on this. With the SL gain modifier on the F3, F2, of course I do have a premium account running at the minute, but that doesn't count. The fact that it's only got a very low modifier is definitely not something that you really want in terms of a grinder. And of course, you're at rank 1 anyway, so you're probably not going to be grinding too much anyway. But as I said, rank 1 USA has quite a lot to give. And as a result, putting a Talisman on the regular F3, F2 is probably your best bet. Of course, bombers, when it comes to this, the only real competitor would be the TBD-1 Devastator and the SB2U3 Vindicator, if you can of course put a Talisman on this, because it's 110 G more than a P shooter. But personally, it is definitely worth that investment due to its capability. And of course, whilst I won't be covering this thing in the series, I mean 450 cals, come on, who would not want that? And you get a back gunner with a 50 cal with mid-war belts? Yeah, that's pretty strong. And it gets a much more variety of bomb load, including a naval mine, which will devastate any tank at this BR. But now you can see why the P shooter is just not advised for putting a Talisman on. And yeah, this is definitely something that we of course finish up with. And that is, in conclusion, the P-26 A-34 M2, whilst it is much better than the other P shooters in some areas, it just doesn't bring enough to the table to really warrant a Talisman investment. And as I said, the F3, F2, whilst it is 0.3 over BR higher, not only does it get the same guns, the same bomb load, better performance, better turn rate, it also handles better and can take damage a little bit better than what this thing can. So that's my first, shall we say, should you Talisman, and it is a negative unfortunately, but to be honest, given some of the Talismans we've got coming up in this series, you're going to be seeing a lot of that. But I hope you enjoyed today's first episode of the Should You Talisman series. If you have any suggestions for how to improve the series, because I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and I'd love some feedback if you've got any, of course. Please put it in the comments below. Next up in the series will of course be the P-26 B-35. But of course, if I'm going to record that, I do want to see feedback from this video itself. Because at the end of the day, that's how I can make these things better for you. Anyway, I'm going to leave you all to it for today. I hope you've enjoyed today's first episode of Should You Talisman. Don't forget to leave any feedback in the comments below, and I will see you all on the next one.